Hello, and welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. My name is David Peacock, and I'm the Senior Advisor to the Future Tourism Group at Simpleview. In their online report, COVID-19 and Jobs, McKinsey Consulting estimated that 57 million U.S. jobs are, quote, vulnerable, a term they use to encompass permanent layoffs, temporary furloughs, or reductions in hours and pay. They also note that leisure and hospitality jobs have accounted for the bulk of the earliest layoffs in this crisis. Here in Canada, the Globe and Mail newspaper reported this weekend that senior management positions have decreased by nearly 30% and mid-management by nearly 15%. That is both surprising and not at the same time. The article goes on to identify that mid-management meetings-based roles and swivel chair jobs that facilitate moving data are particularly under siege. The McKinsey report forecasts that the loss of employment will likely continue to cascade, as strained budgets are beginning to force state and local governments to cut public sector jobs. City governments from Cincinnati to Santa Barbara are already resorting to furloughs and layoffs. A drop in charitable giving is hitting nonprofits hard, and colleges are anticipating cutbacks and cost increases. Consumers have been migrating to digital banking during the shutdown, so fewer bank employees are needed in retail branches, and the leisure industries that we took for granted just 6 months ago are at a virtual standstill. My guest today is uniquely positioned to reflect on how the structure of destination and tourism organizations alike will likely change in the wake of the pandemic. Mike Gamble is President and CEO of SearchWide, the global executive recruitment firm specializing in destination organizations, hotels and resorts, venue management, experiential marketing, trade shows and exhibitions, and sports and entertainment. Mike has worked throughout the industry. Prior to taking the helm at SearchWide, he was SVP of Sales and Marketing for the Philadelphia CVB, and he's held various leadership roles with Marriott International. He served on the foundation boards of Destinations International, PCMA, MPI, and currently sits on the Boys and Girls Club of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Morning, David. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Where are you today and what's it like?
I'm in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we're enjoying summer. You know, any good summer day in Minnesota, we don't take it for granted.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. That was a bit of a doom and gloom forecast. We in the tourism sector have been hit tremendously hard by this crisis. The numbers from McKinsey sort of attest to that. Yeah. I'm reading the same thing around the world in newspapers. They're looking at 39 million jobs 59 million jobs in the UK and Europe together. What do you see just from 40,000 feet on this one?
Yeah, I mean, David, it's impacted every aspect of the greater tourism industry. So while we'll be talking about destination organizations today, as we all know, hotels, airlines, attractions, I mean, everyone certainly has been affected in the greater tourism industry. So it's devastation. And I think that it's a much more difficult leadership role for the leaders of the destination organizations, and it's been a hard road. And the hardest thing too is to understand, when we get a vaccine, when will we start to get back to some normalcy? And again, that's what I'm sure we'll explore today. What exactly does that look like? But yeah, that's really what we're hearing from all of our clients around the world, but certainly especially in North America.
Well, certainly March and April was an absolutely numbing and stupefying time as we made our way into this crisis, and we watched those numbers in terms of layoffs and furloughs just skyrocket. I will say my observation is in May and June and July, we've started to plan on how to come out of this, but one of the consistent questions is, what will my organization look like? It will be different. And I think the Globe article points to the fact it will be leaner on all aspects, not the least of which is senior and mid-management.
Yeah, well, that's right, David. I think that's the real key. I think destination leaders, and we talked about this during Destinations International a bit, really to look at the whole scope of the organization. What might the org chart look like? Will it look like what it did pre-COVID? Probably not. And so that's what we're having a lot of dialogue with the CEOs is really, let's run it like your own business. If it was your own business, kind of how would you rebuild it? With all the furloughs and the layoffs that have happened, when you start to think about bringing people back, start to think about how business has changed, how it will change, and really, I guess, build it from there. And so we're definitely seeing there's a couple of new positions that we think could show up on org charts of destination organizations in the future. I think health, wellness, and safety. Who would have ever thought, right, that a destination organization would have a role like that? And I think that's a very viable role. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, of course. If the destination organization didn't have that role before, boy, it's critically important now. And the last thing I'd say, this community ambassador piece, David, that we've been talking so much about,
Well, I think that's really prescient observations, and those three different emerging roles, and some of them for different reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, the diversity and inclusion, diversity piece, extremely important. You're in Minneapolis, ground zero in some sense, in a crisis that ran parallel to COVID, which is just as impactful. I think that's a really astute observation, and I'm sure that many organizations are moving towards it. The health, wellness, and safety piece, very interesting. Isn't that a very different addition to our makeup?
Yeah, it is, and it's just not up to the facilities anymore, is it? I mean, I think if we're the stewards and the caretakers of the entire destination, this has to be forefront in our minds as to how we're going to welcome guests, what the experience is going to be like. Of course, the facilities will do their work: the convention center, stadiums, arenas, hotels, attractions. But I think that the destination organization has an opportunity to pull it together, if you will. And have the real plan. And I've really seen that. I've seen some of our leaders really step up in that regard and really take this on, which I applaud. And we'll see. I mean, it's hard to really understand what it will look like, 6 months from now. But I think that that will be on the organizational chart for sure.
Well, earlier this week, I was having a conversation with the head of marketing in Montreal, Emmanuelle Legault, and she made a really interesting observation. She said, "Look, we're a world-class cosmopolitan city, but you've got to remember that big cities all over the world are seeing an exodus, not an influx of visitors. Even our residents want to get out of town at a time when social distancing is paramount." So I hadn't asked her that question about health, welfare, and safety, but it's one I'd like to pose to guests going forward, because I think it is a seismic shift in our hiring complement. Now, speaking about that hiring complement, again, as the Globe pointed out, mid-level managers, meetings-based model managers, data facilitation managers, we've got a lot of tremendously talented people in this industry working in those roles. But if you can do the numbers even on the back of a napkin, we're going to be down about 30% or more in our capacity to engage and employ those people, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, Dave, we're going to lose some very talented folks to other industries, unfortunately. I mean, it's inevitable, but let's hope they boomerang back. We see that with the younger generation. So we're very involved, as you know, in the 30 under 30 programs for DI and IAVM, and what we see is sometimes the young people want to go explore and they want to go to tech or healthcare or whatever, and now we're starting to see them boomerang back to our industry, and we can only hope that once this clears, that people will do the same. But I think you're right. The other piece that we're seeing is a lot of job sharing, David, and cross training. And I just think there's, again, so it's a different way to look at it. As we speak to the CEOs, we say, think about, the chance or opportunity you might have to get one of those talented individuals to do some even part-time temp work for you as we get through this crisis. And what an advantage that could be. And so instead of just rebuilding it quickly and bringing on full time, think that way. How do you engage the people who are furloughed and laid off and are great talents, and that will then allow them to maintain through at least the brunt of the crisis to the end. So
It's a really interesting point to talk about the mid-level crew that's university educated, because after the SARS epidemic we had, sorry, local pandemic that we had here in Toronto in 2003, we saw massive layoffs. We lost on average 13% of our annual workforce every month. And the problem that erupted was 45% of the frontline jobs didn't return.
Yeah.
After that. But the good news is that people with university degrees and specialized skills returned at a much higher rate. There was less than 15% attrition there as
Yeah.
they moved into other industries and the like. Google this week said they've extended home working till June 2021. If you're a non-essential Google worker, you can consider it continuing with this setup of home working till 2021. That's a really forward-looking position, isn't it?
Yeah, but I really think that it is. Boy, on one hand, it's great for Google, but certainly bad for our communities, right? That really do need the workforce to come back to the center, if you will, of the city or the destination. But it's really changed. I mean, my business. It's changed a great deal. Even with my team, and while we're all remote, we did have an office here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and our lives have changed so much, as much personally as they have professionally. And this working from home piece that looks, again, as you mentioned, to be well extended into 2021, I think is going to have great ramifications. The other piece is if that's the edict of, boy, you're going to stay home and work from home until mid 2021, think about the travel plans then. What we hear from some of our corporate clients, if you will, they're saying the same about their travel. We probably won't be back in our office till 21. Therefore, we're really not going to get back to traveling like we did until well into 21. And so just a lot of components to that, but certainly a big impact on the workforce.
So when you look at that on a practical level, at sort of the implementation of daily business work, we've all shifted and adjusted to this online world, but it is not the same. It is not the same as sitting in a meeting. I mean, we're getting better at reading proxemic cues from video, but we used to do that in person. We used to hear inflections in people's voices and watch their body language. It's a different world in terms of those meetings. Are your leaders talking about how they're adapting to that with you at all?
Yeah, here's the big issue. Again, great technology. We've all enjoyed it. I think we're all just about done with it because we're all human. We love the human interaction, especially in our industry. We're in the hospitality industry, but think for a minute, if you would, David, and I know you know this as well as anyone, the amount of consensus building, diplomacy, and connection that happens with your stakeholders. I mean, these destination organizations are governed by boards, but the stakeholders outside the boardroom are in the hundreds, and sometimes in the thousands. And think about the interaction you have, informal interactions, almost on a daily basis, bumping into them at Starbucks or bumping them or going to a chamber, reception that evening. I mean, that's the component that honestly we worry a little bit about and that lack of connectivity. So we've been talking with CEOs to say, try to really get the Zoom calls so that they're consistent, and you're really you're the curator of the ideas and you're interacting in a way that you typically would if you were live. The other piece is the board interaction. Sometimes boards felt disconnected anyway, but at least we could see them every month. And now we're on a quick 1 hour Zoom. It's just different. And for a leader and an organization that relies so much on those components, again, that consensus building, that human interaction, those informal meetings, that's the piece that we think the longer it goes could have a pretty big impact on the way the leaders lead.
I totally concur, and the technology has been great. And certainly the technology, I will say with great pride, was further ahead than we were as human beings when we walked into this crisis. So
yeah, that's right.
Great to that. But your point about those human interactions really hits a nerve. And I think, and I'm loath to say it because it's painful, but I think of the people displaced in our industry by this as they go back into the workforce, looking to place themselves in a similar role, similar industry. the whole recruitment process must have changed in some sense. This is going to be particularly virtual to start with, isn't it?
Oh, starting a new job. I mean, we've placed quite a few people, David. We paused our recruiting in the real heart of the COVID crisis, mid-March to mid-April. But as clients really wanted us to get moving again, as they thought that recovery was on the horizon, and it certainly is, we started our recruiting efforts again for a couple of handfuls of clients. But imagine, if you will, from CEO all the way through, VP level, director level, manager, starting a new position, and you're doing it like this, right? And again, it's just, developing that first relationship and that first interaction with people you just don't know. And I'll tell you, it's especially hard. We've placed a few CEOs, and the first couple of months of their new role, they're not in their office. I mean, they're just buzzing around town, having breakfast and lunch and dinner and interacting. And this is now hard work. So yeah, again, an interesting component, right, of what we're going to miss when you start in a new job. If you've been in a role for quite some time, you've already got the credibility, you've already got the relationship. We're all going to get through that, but starting a new job is hard in this environment.
Well, that is interesting, and I think of all the video calls we've all had, and we can put them on a spectrum from tremendously intimate and you can finish each other's thoughts to difficult, trying to determine who's got what role and function. I do believe that happens much better in a room full of people than in digital. So with that in mind, if you're one of those displaced, mid-level managers, senior level managers, data specialists, what do you, any thoughts or ideas about how you approach this? I mean, we're in a world where obviously we have a glut of potential candidates and a dearth of positions. What should they be thinking about as they brush off their credentials?
Yeah, no, it's the great question, and obviously, as you can imagine, we're doing quite a few webinars about exactly this thing. I mean, the first thing is you've got to brush up your digital footprint quickly, and what I would say, whether you're furloughed, David, or laid off, but if you're furloughed, there's a bit of false hope there. So you're hoping that you're going to go back, but you have to kind of act like you're not going back. And, you have to treat finding a job like a full-time job for as much as you can each day. So some people can't handle it for more than an hour or two, and that's okay. If you can put 3 or 4 hours into it, do it. And the real key is genuine and authentic networking. It's the ability really, so again, all your digital footprint, let's just assume that that's completely brushed up and you're looking great. But to be able to reach out to those in your circles and just say, how are you? And how have you been doing? And really start the conversation that way. We find that you reconnect with folks, and that's where opportunities are going to come, but you have to stick with it. And it is going to be a bit frustrating because it's going to be so much longer than perhaps we're used to. The other thing that I would say is be creative with this job sharing idea that we were saying, is to tell people, hey, I'm open to doing a few hours a week, maybe a day or two a week of really some outsourced work for you. And you mentioned it. Imagine the talent in so many aspects of our industry of folks that could contribute in a meaningful way to brands who are hiring and people who are hiring, and at least give them a sense of kind of belonging and give them some work, quite frankly, while they're looking for full-time engagement again. I think that's the way people have to look at it. The gig economy, David, was robust well before COVID, and our younger generations, our 20 to 35 year olds really love the idea of the gig economy, and it's catching on now with the boomers. And I think this pandemic will really cement the gig economy, and people will start to think more and say, I can do a couple of things. I don't maybe need one full-time job.
Well, I do love the gig economy model, but I do find working remotely in COVID, I'm 7 days a week, 24 hours a day now. And I wonder how they manage it to the point where they have a life as well. And I'm sure you're the same. I mean, we can be on a call at 10 o'clock at night because we're dealing with the West Coast, or we can be on a call at 4 a.m. because we're dealing with Britain and France. So I find most of us who are working more. But I want to talk about something you said, and I'm really excited by it. You talked about digital footprint, and we use that term all the time in tourism to talk about a destination's digital footprint, but an individual person's digital footprint as they go out and look for work. That's fascinating. I mean, obviously you've got your common assets, your digital CV, your LinkedIn positions, but is it becoming, appropriate and de rigueur that you would take, a list of every article that you've written or been mentioned in and attach it now to your digital CV so people can click on and read about it because they're looking for a rich representation of you as a potential employee as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I really think it's probably got to be a little more authentic, in that if you're active on Twitter, they'll see that, what it is that you're talking about and commenting on. But I'll tell you this, even at all levels, and even at the CEO level, when we present a candidate, and you can imagine the credentials that we forward to a client when we present a candidate, our clients 9 out of 10 times will immediately go to look at the digital footprint, and they'll first likely go to LinkedIn. And
Sure.
even before they call us back to talk about the person, because they want to see where's the connectivity, have they worked with anyone I know? Have they worked anywhere that I might have worked? I mean, it's amazing what we go look for to learn more about the person before we even seek to engage. So that's really what we're all about. A lot of times people like to leave things off their resume, and that's okay. Nobody wants a 5-page resume. But what I say is somewhere even on your LinkedIn page, if it's early in your career, hey, early in my career, worked at Marriott, worked wherever, that could be a connection point with a potential employer that could be gold. And so don't leave that out. And so I think that's the real essence of that. So, but to your point, curating everything that you have done and having it handy, I think is good. Too much could be a little off-putting, right? But having it and someone say, hey, I read this article. Do you have any more of those? Well, sure. And then be able to send it, I think is really terrific. So those are some of the things that we mean when we talk about that.
Well, and I think that's good. And I'd underline that by saying, paraphrasing you and saying your active digital footprint. What you did in the past is
That's
great,
right.
but what you're doing right now matters.
That's right.
We don't have a channel that's particularly tourism focused, a network like a LinkedIn network for tourism executives, staffers, and people. And I wonder if we should sometimes, because it is a very specific industry. It would be great if there were, a subsection of a LinkedIn that was tourism focused. I know we can search by that, but I think we're about to have the ranks of that cohort swell tremendously. And as we talked about at the beginning, there is a tremendous amount of talent in there. The one thing we shouldn't be short on in the next while is finding really good candidates who've done remarkable work.
Yeah.
Fair enough?
Oh, that's fair enough. Yeah, there's no question about that. In fact, for some, depending on the jobs, the hard part will be sorting through, the great talent. But yeah, it's again, it's going to take a lot of years to absorb this talent back into the workforce. And that's why what I said earlier about losing some of our great talent to other industries, it's inevitable. It's already happening. It will continue to happen. And, what we can hope is when we get back to a robust nature in a couple of years that people boomerang back, and that's terrific. But, I honestly, I hope it happens, because you want these folks to be able to find work and engagement. If they can find it in another industry through this, then that's terrific.
Well, I so appreciate this discussion, Michael, because there are a ton of people out there listening and thinking about their own lives and what happens next. And we've been through the crisis. We've identified the major themes in terms of what has to happen next in tourism. And we're just getting started on this idea of implementing those changes. And I think what SearchWide and what you bring to the table in terms of insights into employment is super helpful and timely. And I'm just going to ask you as we round out here, are there any individual thoughts or ideas that you feel important to share, either with the CEO who's looking to restructure, with the individual who's looking to make a lateral move, or someone who's looking at trying to break into this industry, for example, in your health and wellness model?
Yeah. Well, and thanks again for having me. The one comment I will make, we didn't talk much about our really the boards. Yeah, and this, we have to diversify our boards ethnically, from a gender perspective, but also from an experience perspective. So as we start to add positions that are likely outside of our industry today, we should think that way for our board of directors, because the outside influence, outside of our own comfort zone, if you will, that's going to make us that much stronger in the communities in which we work. And so that's one comment that I wanted to be sure to touch on, because it's been a focal point for us. We just did a paper with Bill Geist, NDI, that really focused on ethnic board diversity, but it is about getting outside your comfort zone into other circles and other communities within your own community.
Well, that's a really great point. And Mike, I know from reading your work and watching you that that's something close to your heart that you've been working on for a long time. And on behalf of the industry, I mean, it sounds silly, but I thank you for that. I think it's tremendously important that we act on those things.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been great to have you. I'd like to call you back in the late fall, and we can talk about what's actually happened on the employment front. But it's great to see you. Thanks for all your hard work, and have a great day.
David, thanks for having me.